Welcome to the DS Incubator. Today we are talking about, we are on the series about the terminal, and we are talking today about starting the terminal and the basic commands to navigate your file system. This is a recording after the actual meetup because the video for the live session for some reason finished earlier. Someone told me that, so we'll need to repost the link to this longer full video. So the resources that I used to prepare part one are two. One is the Appendix A of HappyGit with R. It has a section that talks about the shell, and also the Unix shell lesson of the carpentries. Here you have the links to follow the original resources. The objectives are to understand what is the shell, to start a shell, to set up the lesson materials, to navigate your file system, and next time we're going to be talking about modifying your file system, doing things like creating, copying, moving files, and also to remove files. But we're not going to be talking about that today. We don't have time for that. Also, we're going to be in part one, and in another chapter, we're going to be talking about how to compose commands, sort the output that you get from the terminal, and redirecting results. Also, I'm going to be showing how to edit text files, and this is an addition to the plan that I presented last week, inspired by feedback from CJ in particular. It happens that sometimes you are dropped in an environment with very weird text editors, and you don't have an alternative. So it's good to know how those editors work, and at least the minimum skills that you need to create a file, save a file, and even leave that text editor, which can be surprisingly hard. And then in other parts, we're going to be talking about finding things, iterating, and reusing code. Also, something that I didn't think of before, which is the idea of users and privileges. Most of us don't have a lot of experience with multi-user systems, but the terminal is very common in Linux environments, and I heard that some people at 2 degrees do need to interact with remote computers which have Linux running on them, and that is a multi-user environment, and it's interesting to know, for at least for those people, interesting to know the basics of how that works, and why maybe files that you create with that one user created might not be accessible to another user, and how what you can do to fix that. And also I'm going to be talking a little bit about dot files, which is something that again I didn't consider last week, but now I think it's a good idea. The idea of basically setting up your preferences for your system, and how to probably store those files in places that allow you to recover if you lose your system. If you break your system, you have to kind of restart your system, or you lose your computer and you have to start a new one. How do you quickly get the computer environment that you like? All right, so but focusing on what we have for today. First thing is to make a little comment about what is the shell, and let me for that go to the folder that hosts the materials of the day. So the shell is simply a program to run other programs, in the same way that, for example, if you have a Windows computer, you click on things and programs start, and then you click on other or on X's and programs close. So all those things allow you to interact with programs from your computer. So the same thing is what you can do with a shell. It's important because it's very fast. It's a very concise way to also express what you want the computer to do, and it's everywhere. So having a good command of the terminal is tends to be very useful. The most common shell is called Bash. There's many shells, and Windows confusingly has by default a few shells that are not Bash, and that is why it's very important to know that Bash word, because if you are not using Bash, what I'm showing here may not work. Also, you may have noticed that I use the word shell and terminal interchangeably. it seems that there are some differences, or at least some people are interested in highlighting those differences. Not me, so here I'm going to be using the word shell or terminal or command line or console almost as synonyms. So how you go about studying a shell? If you are within our studio, so let's open here our studio. You can go to tools and you have a shell entry there in the menu. That will pop up whatever shell is configuring your system to run. So I'm going to close that. And also you will see that you have a terminal here as well. Here, right? So those are two places where you can get access to a terminal inside our studio. And if you want to access a terminal outside a studio, usually that actually here the idea of checking which terminal you have might be important. So if you are already on a shell, like I'm here now, you can type echo $sign shell. Basically what we are doing here, something that we haven't covered yet, is the idea of printing the value that is stored in what's called an environmental variable. The environmental variable here is shell, and you evoke it with that $sign, and echo is just a command that prints the contents of something, and the output is this one here, which is simply a path inside the computer that is showing me that I'm using a shell. It's not bash, it's called ZSH. It's very close to bash, so for the purposes of this meetup it could work, but I'm going to be using a different environment though, so you can reproduce it more easily. Also, you may want to check if if that echo command that I show you, echo $shell, didn't work. You might want to check here in tools, global options. You will see that there is an entry for terminal. This is taking some time to update. There you go. So see what you have here in new terminals open with. You may have the option bash, so I could probably have the CSH. So here I have custom. I'm not sure how that appear there, but it looks like it knows which shell to invoke, because when I click there on tools shell, the one that opened was the one that I want. And also when I create a new shell, a new terminal here, I get the terminal that I'm familiar with, the one that I like. So going back to the contents, so far we talked a lot about the shell and our studio, but if you're outside our studio, how do you start a shell? Well, macOS has places where you can find programs by their name. I guess I think it's called Spotlight. You could use Spotlight to find the program terminal just by typing terminal. I'm doing something similar here by pressing what it could be the start key. I think it's called in Windows, or the Windows key. So I press that in my I'm using Linux. I'm on an Ubuntu system, and here I can start typing. So I can type terminal, and that's how I invoke a terminal and start using it. I'm gonna close it. And if you're in Windows, know that to get it bash terminal, you first need to install Git, and here I give a link so that you can do so. And if you have any questions about Git, in particular what relates to R, I strongly recommend the book Happy Git with R, which has that appendix A that I mentioned before, where you can learn a lot about the shell, but also has a chapter 6 on how to install Git, with some useful entries for debugging issues, debugging problems. Okay, so if you're on Windows, then you first need to install Git, and then you can start Git bash, maybe just by pressing the Windows key and start typing Git bash, or just bash should give you a short link to start the program. So you assuming that you already started a terminal, then the next thing you could like to do to follow along is to get the data that lives here under the link example data. If I click there, this downloads folder. So download that folder and zip it and place it in desktop. That's where it's going to be for the rest of the lesson of the meetup. And I'm gonna be using a system that is running inside a Docker container because I would like to provide a way for whoever is motivated enough to reproduce what you see in my computer. So the way I'm doing that is actually, we could do what we have been showing so far. So I could start a shell here with tools shell. That would open a terminal there on the directory where I'm working, which is the repository dedicated to this meetup. And here I have already placed a couple of files that allow Docker to know which computer environment I want. So all I need to do now is do docker compose up. Typing that will start an instance of RStudio on a web browser. So the next thing I want to do here is go to a web browser, create a new tab, and type localhost. So localhost will be the place where I can access RStudio. So the username is RStudio and the password is 123. That's how it's set up. It doesn't have to be a secure password for this use case. Here you can see RStudio, very similar to what you have when you work with RStudio locally. So going back to the materials of the lesson, now we are about to start talking a little bit about the most common commands to navigate your file system. So very important is to know where we are. So PWD stands for print working directory. So I'm sorry, here I'm lost. This is the tab I want. So maybe what I can do is like leave RStudio here and this tab here to the right, so I have a way to know what I wanted to discuss. So let's leave that there, and here I don't need all that space, so I'm gonna open the terminal here. Okay, so print working directory tells us that we are under /home/RStudio. RStudio is the user, and in many systems that's how it works. The directory that is called the home of that user has the name of the user. So there is a command actually that I wasn't planning to show today, but I think it's fun. It's called who am I. That will tell you who is the user of this computer. The user is called RStudio. The name has been set up by the Docker image that I'm using. It wasn't me. So I know now that I'm in the home, and also I could know that because the prompt here, that tilde $, and blinking cursor shows that tilde. So the tilde is the short for the home of a computer. So I'm in home, and I can confirm that here on the visual interface here. So if I click here, I'm in the home, and under home I can also see in the visual interface that there are two directories, desktop and projects. So to know or to get access to that same information from the terminal, you just do ls for list, so like list the contents, and there those two directories are. So ls has a ton of options. So minus minus help, if it is configuring your system, should give you something like this. So let me expand this. This is the help file for ls. As you can see, there is a ton of options, and it can be a little overwhelming in the beginning, but it's worth trying to make an effort to understand what's going on. So this is the format, the general form of a call to ls. So I'm going to create a new file here to kind of store that so that we can analyze it a little bit. So basically, you can see ls, which is the command, then some options that are in brackets because they are optional. You can choose not to pass any option, and maybe more than one option. So that's why you have ... And same thing for files. So you can request ls for a file or a directory, but that's optional. That's why it's within brackets. And then ... means that you can request the contents for more than one file or more than one directory. So for example, valid calls could be simply ls, right? Because that's the only compulsory thing, the only thing that is not on within square brackets. It could also be valid to do an option like -a, which stands for all. So let's scroll up here. So all, right, the short form of all. Maybe some other flag we could also use. There is one that I like if you want to see the, for example, a long list with some additional information of the directory. You could also do -L, right? So these are options. We could omit them, and there are more than one because this is possible. We have dot 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 here, and then in the part of file, so that's another alternative. And now let's say that we want to pass as an argument a folder that we want to look into. So that could be desktop, for example, desktop, right? So this could be the option of the option that corresponds to file, and we are not limited to just one. We could do also projects, the two directories that we know live in there. So all of these are valid calls. As it is also valid to join different flags. So -A and -L can be compacted as -AL together. And then here we could do the same. So these are valid calls. So let's try them out. Let's go here to the terminal. If you want to clear, this and just for to avoid confusion, you can type clear, or you can do Control L. The two things will just get rid of all the output that you see there. So let's try ls -A first. That will give us the contents of this directory, including some files that are hidden. What are hidden files? Well, files and folders that start with a dot. So if you click here in more and show hidden files, you'll see now that there is a matching between the files that we see in the visual interface and here on the terminal, including some files that are for configurations that we're going to be talking about later in the series. So now I'm going to recover the last command with the up arrow, and I can keep pressing to recover other items in the history, or I can go back now with the down arrow. So -A is what I wanted. Now I'm going to add the L for that long list of options. So here what we see is an output that is more rich. So we have information about who created, which was the user that created the specific files. But more importantly, right now I want to highlight, for example, the time and date when those files were created. And why? Because I'm going to add another flag here, and it's going to be T to sort for time. So now the output is sorted by date. So ls -ALT could give me just what you're seeing here. And I could do, let's do only ls for desktop and projects, for example. Let's clear this up with Control L, ls desktop and projects. And if you are wondering how did I type so quickly, well, the answer is I did not type that quickly. I just typed a few keystrokes and then pressed tab for autocomplete. So those are some of the few ways in which you can write paths very efficiently in the terminal. So here you can see the output now has like two sections: a section for the contents of desktop and a section for the contents of terminal. So fair enough. I'm gonna hide the hidden directories and folders. So if we click in desktop, there we see the contents of it, and we could continue clicking and seeing the guts of that folder, but we're not gonna do it just now. So let's go back to the lesson. We talked about ls, and now the next command that and by the way, so the ls, so the help is not unique to ls. Most commands do have a flag that invokes a help, but it may not work for you, and that is because the command, when it was written, maybe it was not a thing to create a -- help flag. But what should work is man, which is a command that invokes the manual for a command. However, it won't work in this specific system because this system has been minimized to fit very lightly inside a Docker container. But if I show you another terminal, like in my computer, man ls does show the same thing that you get with ls help. right? So if one doesn't work, then try the other one. That's my advice. Now let's go back to the contents of the lesson. So now it's time to know how you actually move. So for now, we have been able to see the contents of different directories, but we haven't actually moved anywhere. We stayed all the time in what was the home directory. So we can move with change directory, for example, to desktop, and now you can see desktop appears in the prompt. That's not always the case. It depends on how you have configured your computer or your terminal to display the prompt. So that's how it's configured here, and I think it's a nice thing to have, always an idea of where you're standing. And then if I wanted to go back, I have an option. I can do cd minus, and that will take me to the last place where I was. So if I recover the last command with cd minus, the last place where I was desktop. So that should take me back to desktop. So I could do this one time and again, and all the time move from one directory to the other. Another thing you may have noticed is when I did ls with -a, you may have noticed that there is a dot and a dot dot. So those are ways for you to refer to paths relative to the place where you're standing. So if I do ls or if I do ls dot, I'm doing the same thing. Dot stands for here, where I'm right now. And dot dot stands for the parent. So if I do ls dot dot, that is the contents of the parent of desktop, which is of course something that includes desktop, right? Because the parent of desktop has desktop as a child. So yeah, those are very common, useful tricks to know, I guess. And the very last one I wanted to mention today is the tilde, which, as you know, I said before, it stands for the home, but you can also use it to explore things, with ls tilde, for example, or to change directory with cd change directory tilde, for example, will take us back there. Okay, then the last thing I want to mention are a couple of tricks that I learned actually when preparing for this lesson, which here it is. So some tricks to advice for writing paths. First, that window uses, and here it didn't appear, but what it uses is backslash. So where you could see a forward slash in Mac or Linux, in Windows, I think you will see a backslash. I think it does work if you use a forward slash to write path for Windows, but yeah, that's how it is. And sometimes it's hard to type path because the paths may have spaces, and it's kind of difficult to to know which if a space is something within the path or something that belongs to a second path that you're trying to type. So one trick that can help you with that is that you can drag files inside the terminal. So for example, just a video, if I drag it there, what it does is it pastes the path. So I can now start doing things with it. So I could do ls. So I'm going to press Ctrl A. That takes me to the front of anything that you have in the terminal. And if you want to go to the end, you use the Ctrl E. So A takes you to the first column in the terminal, and E to the last one. So if I go to the beginning, I could do an ls for a file is just the path of that file, and if I want to do, for example, ls for the parent of that file, so like every video, that should list all the videos that I have here, right? So the trick that I wanted to show is that you can drag a file to the terminal just to get very quickly the full path to that file. Any other trick I want to share? Okay, autocomplete, I already showed that. So if you are like here, for example, an ls will show that I have desktop and project. So it's very easy to disambiguate. Ooh, that didn't come up very nicely. So to disambiguate which, for example, the directory I want to create a path for. So if I do D, that is enough to for the terminal to know that I want to type desktop. So D plus the tab completes the whole path, and if I type P and press the tab, it completes the full Word project. But I keep pressing tab, and I can get the contents of that folder. So I keep pressing. So now I press and nothing happens. So I'm going to press once again, And what happened is that it was ambiguous what exactly I want to type. So now I'm presented with all the options. So now I could do like 00, for example, and then tab, and that is unambiguous. Once again, it's readme, but it looks like it's more than one readme. So pressing again, it gives me readme MD and readme RMD. So I type R and then tab, and that completes the whole path, right? So I'm gonna clear this with Control L, as I said before, and now I'm gonna press Control C, which kind of cancels what you were about to do. So it gives me a fresh prompt with like no path or anything. Control L again to clean. I think that's all except for this one. I already mentioned that you can use the up and down arrow to recover commands that you typed before. And there's also this search previous command. I don't know if it's, how about here? So ls r doesn't work. Ls space r. I don't know. I think it's not working for me, and I'm not quite sure why, honestly. But you may want to just try, and if I figure it out next time, I'll let you know. That's all I wanted to cover today. Wrapping up, what we did is we learned how to start a terminal, and we learned very coarsely what a terminal is. We can refer to it, at least in this series, as shell, as terminal, as command line, as console. Also, we learned how to start a terminal from inside or outside our studio, and a few commands are very common for navigating your file system. Alright, that's all for now. I hope you find this content useful. See you next time.